The book How the Mighty Fall by Jim Collins. In this video, we have summarized 8 lessons to learn from how successful companies can suddenly collapse when they make the wrong decisions. Lesson 1. No matter how amazing they are, every business and organization is susceptible to failure. The Roman Empire ruled over Europe and the Middle East in the first few centuries following the birth of Christ. It was enormous, extending from Iran in the east to Portugal in the west. There would have been no question in the minds of those present at the time that this enormous, all-conquering dominion would last forever. Unfortunately, it did not. In just a few centuries, it vanished and was consigned to history's garbage dump. No matter how big or effective anything is, it will always be in danger of failing, as evidenced by the fall of the Roman Empire. But what brings about decline? What might cause such a massive thing to collapse? A major organization will always go downhill on its own. Collapse is never the result of unfavorable circumstances or bad luck, it is always the direct outcome of poor management. 15 years ago, do you recall how commonplace Nokia phones were? Since then, the market-leading status of the corporation has changed to a meager 3% market share. Why? Nokia's management made the decision to innovate in other, less lucrative fields while their rivals, like Apple and Samsung, were studying and developing smartphone technology. Nokia was thus entirely out of the running when smartphones gained popularity. It's crucial to emphasize that we are not discussing laziness at this stage. Successful businesses rarely fail because they do nothing. More often, it's because they act incorrectly. In reality, failing businesses frequently exhibit extremely high levels of inventiveness and drive. A good illustration of this is Bank of America. The bank was eager to modernize antiquated procedures in the 1980s. They terminated the practice of hiring employees for life, hired a young, vivacious CEO, and shuttered vast tracts of loss-making branches. However, the corporation recorded some of the most stunning losses in banking history during this time. Lesson 2. Businesses often become haughty and hubristic after achieving enormous success. Greek tragedy may or may not be familiar to you. Greek tragedies frequently feature heroes who have fallen victim to hubris, or being so overconfident that they aim too high and fail. But not just the ancient Greeks were prone to hubris, prosperous businesses often run the risk of letting their confidence get the better of them. Consider Motorola, a producer of mobile devices. Motorola experienced a phenomenal run of prosperity between the late 1980s and the early 1990s, during which their yearly revenues soared from $5 billion to $27 billion. A triumph that brought about extreme overconfidence and costly errors. The creation of the StarTAC cell phone was one such error. The StarTAC had an issue since it continued to use an analog system when other phone makers were beginning to switch to digital. Motorola gave in to pride and continued to produce StarTAC instead of ceasing manufacture of an outmoded product, bragging that 43 million analog consumers can't be incorrect. Naturally, the phone was a failure, and Motorola's market share fell from 50% to 17%. Arrogant neglect, or when businesses lose interest in their main businesses, is another risk associated with overconfidence. When a business is successful, it frequently seeks to expand outside of its primary market. Sometimes their desire is so great that they lose sight of what first made them successful. Circuit City, a company that sells consumer electronics, experienced this. They began experimenting with other areas after finding great success, including the sale of used vehicles and the rental of DVDs. They put a lot of time and money into these endeavors in order to succeed, leaving the consumer electronics industry to wither as a result. The company was severely impacted by losing this important area of business, and it ultimately failed. Lesson 3. If businesses chase unsustainable levels of innovation and growth, they risk losing their direction. Why do prosperous businesses fail? Is it due to indifference? In reality, the majority of them fail for the exact opposite reason: they try to innovate and expand too quickly. Companies that seek for unsustainable levels of innovation abandon sound business strategies like controlling costs or focusing on lucrative markets. A business that neglects the fundamentals will never be successful. Rubbermaid, a maker of household goods, is a prime illustration of this. It was formerly deemed to be America's most admired firm by Fortune magazine, but it has since lost favor. Rubbermaid was praised for its high levels of invention, but the business went above and beyond by setting a goal to add one new product to their line every day. This extreme approach allowed them to produce approximately 1,000 new goods in just 3 years. But all of these innovations had a price. They failed to meet customer demands and completely lost control of their costs as a result of their obstinate pursuit of new items. Their lack of discipline weakened their inventions, and they fell out of favor quickly before being taken over by a competitor. A company may overextend itself by attempting to expand too quickly. This is particularly risky for publicly traded organizations, which frequently face enormous pressure to seek profits as rapidly as possible due to the large number of shareholders they must appease. For instance, banks pursued rapid profits at all costs before the 2008 financial crisis. This caused them to incur significant debt, invest in hazardous but extremely profitable products, and disregard expenses. While their efforts to grow in this way gave them immediate benefits, overextending themselves put them at great risk in the long run. Many of them suffered significant losses when the system crashed in 2008, and others even went bankrupt. Lesson 4. Companies decide to overlook or place blame on others as soon as the first obvious indicators of deterioration appear. What should we do if our heroes are criticized? Do we take into account what they have to say? Do we choose to disregard their comments and maintain our belief that our heroes are faultless? Normally, we ignore other people's opinions and don our rose-colored glasses when they tell us something we don't want to hear. Businesses may fall victim to this trap. And in their situation, rejecting sensible criticism can result in grave errors. What happened to Motorola was this. The business dominated the cell phone industry in the 1980s. Cell phones at the time were quite pricey and had many limitations. Motorola believed they had the ideal solution in the form of a mobile satellite phone. They began creating the Iridium satellite phone in the following few years. However, as they were creating it, the cost and quality of conventional cell phones fell. It was rapidly obvious that a cell phone would have quality significantly superior to Iridium. So what action took Motorola? They opted to ignore the criticism by donning their rose-colored glasses. When Iridium did ultimately launch, it was more expensive and of lesser quality than its rivals, and unsurprisingly, it failed. Motorola spent $2 billion on the project in all, most of which might have been saved had they discontinued it sooner. But dismissing criticism is only one example of how businesses mishandle unwelcome news. Additionally, businesses look for someone else to blame for their own shortcomings. Any business that receives bad news should use it in a productive, useful way. Yet so many businesses fail to follow this. They would rather continue along the incorrect path by merely attributing their predicament to outside sources. Lesson 5. When faced with a calamity, businesses frequently make drastic, hazardous changes or give up. If you've ever been aboard a boat that is sinking, you are aware that panic is the typical reaction to a dire situation. It's also how the majority of business executives react when a downturn begins, which could prompt hasty decisions that simply make the issue worse. One such response is to look for the silver bullet, or a broad answer that can address all issues. Many businesses believe that changing everything they've always done is the best course of action. For instance, they might attempt to introduce a novel, untested technology, alter the corporate culture, or even hunt for a completely different market. Even though these drastic modifications can occasionally give an immediate boost, they are rarely able to stop the decline. The acts of Hewlett-Packard, HP, in the 1990s are a fantastic illustration of the use and failure of a silver bullet. HP overhauled its corporate culture in response to its slow growth. First, it fired its longtime, rather predictable CEO and brought in Carly Fiorina, a glamorous, media-savvy person who tried to entirely alter the company's image through a series of advertising and media appearances. She believed that a more contemporary-looking business would do better. It didn't, though. The organization genuinely lost motivation and focus as a result of too much change. As HP's development stalled out, Fiorina was let go a few years later. However, there is a more extreme remedy for decline than the magic bullet: a corporation can just give up. The once proud company, Scott Paper, experienced this. They finally caved in after making fruitless attempts to stem the rot. To reduce the company's losses, a new CEO was appointed, costing 11,000 employees, and what was left was sold to its arch-rival. Lesson 6. Since decline is always brought on by the individual, it's critical to concentrate on changing your perspective. So far, we've seen what mistakes CEOs make that endanger their companies. We'll now examine what executives can do to prevent this from happening. The most crucial aspect of making the finest selections is having the proper mindset, so we'll start there. Admitting you're not as smart as you think you are is the first step toward having the appropriate attitude. So many great leaders have the arrogant and narrow-minded mentality that their accomplishments are solely the result of their own efforts. Instead, managers must always keep in mind that luck plays some role in success, if not all of it. Realizing the significance of luck will help them control their haughty behavior. The second step is for leaders to acknowledge that they are continually learning new things. Leaders typically fall into one of two categories: those with knowledge who believe they already know everything, and those with learning who are constantly curious about why things are happening and what they can teach them. Leaders that are always learning are the most effective. Sam Walton, the man behind Walmart, was one such leader. He once had a visit from some Brazilian businesspeople seeking advice. They soon switched roles, and he found himself eager to learn from them instead. Finally, a leader must always keep their roots in mind and avoid letting hubris rule. Leaders may prevent their organizations from going too far if they keep this in mind. Just think back to the terrible case of Circuit City. As long as you keep your attention on your primary business, the one that brought you success, there is nothing wrong with exploring other fields and researching cutting-edge technologies. Lesson 7. Keep your composure and practice discipline if you find yourself slipping rather than taking huge risks. All business executives will have to think about taking chances at some point in their careers, particularly if their company is having trouble. As long as you keep in mind that a hazardous approach could fail, there is nothing wrong with pursuing it. When considering a dangerous tactic, you should consider what might happen if something goes wrong. Will the company suffer significant harm as a result, or will we be able to recover? The waterline concept can be used to determine what risks are worthwhile. Think of yourself as being on a boat where each poor choice results in a hole being blasted in the hull. Your choice will determine whether the hole is above the waterline, where repairs can be made, or below it, where water will rush in and drown you. Make cautious to only take risks whose consequences you can repair rather than ones that will sink your boat. Now that you are aware that taking risks can be dangerous, how can you determine which risks to take? Never vary your routine drastically, is the basic rule of thumb. Making significant changes to your business strategy at the risk of failure will only produce instability and lack of concentration. Recall HP? It hired a new CEO who made significant changes to the organization's culture and image, but the modifications only caused the corporation to lose its business discipline, which slowed performance. You should take baby steps rather than radical ones. Make a tiny, manageable risk if you must take one. If it's a success, you can add another to it. Lesson 8. Even failing businesses can rise again with the correct focus and resolve. The natural inclination is to give up and go when things are bad and it looks like there is no way out. This is how companies in tough circumstances frequently feel as well, believing that their only alternative is to give up. There's no need to fear, though, because a business can make things better until the fat woman starts singing. That is, if they behave properly. Adopting the appropriate mindset is the first step business executives need to take to reverse decline. Even if everyone else believes they are doomed, they must have faith in themselves and their business. An excellent example of a person who had confidence in himself even when others did not is Winston Churchill. He was forced out of government at the start of the 1930s, blamed for Britain's dire economic situation, and, to make matters worse, he was going through a depressive episode. He was viewed as a spent force by everyone. Churchill, however, resisted and became the British Prime Minister and a military general at the beginning of the following decade. As they say, the rest is history. Recovering from failure requires a lot of hard effort in addition to having the appropriate attitude. When they realized how much difficulty they were in, their stock value having fallen by an astounding 92% in less than 2 years, photocopying business Xerox did exactly that. And Mulcahy was hired as the new CEO and started working right away. She fought to turn the company profitable again for 4 years without taking a single weekend off. Only 5 years after it seemed like it was going out of business, the company achieved an annual profit of $1 billion as a result of her strict schedule and commitment to the cause. I appreciate your attention. If this video piques your curiosity and you're curious to learn more, click the link to Amazon below to order the book. Please remember to subscribe, like, and forward this video to your loved ones.